Hi everyone. In the last video we learned how to put everything together and how to calculate the indicators we wanted to create. Now in this second video we will learn how to make the most of this data and learn something from it. Let's try to do some analysis and to see relationships between the data patterns and other anomalies that we can find in this data. Let's start making a simple question. What are the provinces with the highest homicide rates, and what factors are related to the level of homicide in these provinces? So these simple questions, we'll try to answer them by analyzing our indicators and the relationship between them. The first thing, let's create a new spreadsheet in the same book. Let's just create a new sheet in order to preserve the original data. It's important not to change the original data, so if we make something wrong, we can always go back to the original. So I'll copy the province name here and the province, the homicide rate here in the one of the final columns. We have here homicide rate. So the first thing I want to know is what are the provinces that have the highest homicide rate. This is easy. I just need to order from the highest to the lowest level value. So I have here Ceuta, Melilla, Sevilla, Malaga, and so on and so forth, until Zamora and Teruel y Palencia, that they have 0 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. How can we compare this? The idea is, the first thing we need to know is what is the average? What is the Spanish average for this variable? So the first thing we need to do is calculate the average. We have here, the data goes from B2 to B53. So I will compute here the average, that is promedio or mean, from B2 to B53. It's 2.4. So 2.4 is the Spanish average. Okay. So now, what I will do is I will sort this again from the highest to the lowest level, and then I will emphasize using color and bold. I will emphasize where the Spanish average is. So we can see that there are some, the number of provinces above the Spanish average or Spanish mean are, the number is lower. There is fewer provinces above the Spanish average than those that are below the average. So there is a concentration of crime of homicides in particular in a given number or a few number of provinces. So, and what about how much they are more or less? We can convert this data into percentages of the mean. As you have learned in mathematics in school, if you divide anything by a number, you express this other number by the denominator. So if I divided 16.5 by 2.4, I have the number of times this 16 number of times of Spanish means that this 16.5 represents. So let's do it. Let's create a formula equal, for create a formula, B2 divided by 2.4. As I can see here, I have 6.9 times. Ceuta's homicide rate is 6.9 times higher than the Spanish average. It's a lot. Let's multiply it by 100 to see in percentage. So Ceuta's homicide rate is 688.5% higher than the Spanish average. So we can do this and copy the formula for all Spanish provinces. And we see that we have the average, and we have small increases, relatively small increases, and then we have Ceuta and Melilla. These two are really much higher than Spanish average. So these are two anomalies. The pattern is just to get a little bit higher than the average or a little bit lower than the average, but having values higher, such as above 10, is really beyond what usually happens in Spain. So we have something different going on in Ceuta and Melilla. We can try to see this using other variables to understand. The first thing we did, we create a table, province and homicide, and we ordered it. We analyzed this data. But what else we can do? We can create a graphic, a chart. So we can select here province and homicide. Let's put fancy names, and then select all the values. And in Excel, there is this tab here, insert, that allows us to create graphics. So we can click here and create 2D bar graph, a simple bar graph. So what we have here is a bar graph of homicide by Spanish province. As we can see, this is a very ugly graph. Most of Excel default charts are very ugly. So we need to learn how to change these things to make it a little bit more user friendly. We can change color, for example. We can take border off, and then to just highlight where the average is. And we can see here more clearly how much Ceuta and Melilla are far from the average. This is a way of understand how homicide relates to the Spanish average, and what are the most violent provinces in Spain. Another thing we can do, let's just delete this. Another thing we can do is put another variables and try to think about the relationship of these variables with let's go back. Let's go back here. I will erase everything and try to think what are the causes, or what can be things, or what things can be related to the homicide rate. So we can just copy here the province again, because I changed the order, and homicide rate, and we can think about what things that can be related. Maybe population, maybe GDP, maybe unemployment. So let's copy these variables here to our new spreadsheet. Now we have homicide rate, we have GDP per capita, we have population, we have unemployment. These numbers here are difficult to see, so we can just change, put them as numbers, and edit it like to see them a little bit more with 1,000 separations, dots for separating um, big marks for 1,000, etc. So we can do the same, visually inspect the data and see if there is any relations. It does not appear to have any relationship between sizes, GDP per capita, for example, and homicide rate. It doesn't seem to have many relationship between population and homicide rate. Maybe unemployment. We see that those provinces with lower unemployment seem to have lower levels of homicide rate, and those with higher levels of homicide rate, they usually have uh, um, a higher rate of unemployment. So we can test this relationship. We can make a graph called scatter plot. Right? We just select these two, and then we go here and insert, and here XY dispersion or scatter plot is the name, and we just select this scatter plot and make the relationship between homicide rate and um, rate of unemployment. We see that there is some relationship, but we have these two values here that are this is Ceuta and this is Melilla. So let's take this off, this ugly thing, and let's just take these stream cases. If we take the stream cases out, what we see that there is a relationship here. How can we know the intensity of the relationship? We can right click the graph. You can manipulate the graph as you wish. For example, here I just put them back, and then I right click here, and or the best thing to do is to aggregate elements to the graphics. For example, here I want a trend line. Trend line is like, is there any relationship between these two variables? No one, if you don't want any, but we want a linear relationship. So how much the increase in unemployment affects the homicide rate. This is the relationship we're trying to establish here. We see that here we have a very linear relationship. It seems that the higher the rate of unemployment, the higher the level of the homicide rate. We can go further and try to add some other elements. Options here. and we can ask for um, to present us with the value. The R square is the coefficient of determination. We will learn this in statistics for regression analysis, is the intensity of the relationship. The closer to 1, stronger is the relationship. The closer to 0, the smaller the relationship. Here I'm considering all the cases. So the R2 is around 0.16. So homicide rate would explain, for example, 16.7% of homicide. Let's take this just to understand how to interpret this variable. So if I use just unemployment to explain homicide rate, I can tell that the unemployment is capable of explaining 16.7% of all the variation in homicide rate. But let's take again these two anomalies, these two cases out of the equation of the graph, and let's see how this number changes. Okay, so we see that there is a steep slope. The slope is higher. The degree of the slope is higher, and the R square increased from 16% to 25%. So it's much higher when we take these cases that are anomalous out of the equation. So what we can infer from this graph, the highest the rate of unemployment, the highest the level of homicide rate. This is an association. I'm not telling that unemployment an unemployed guy will kill somebody. This is not the right interpretation, but these things are associated. Why unemployment and homicide are associated? These things can be by a population, for example. Um, in in larger cities, people get more or more unemployed, and there are more homicides. So we can test for this relationship between population and homicide rate. Let's make another graph. Let's take this here for now, and let's create a new graph using just population and population and homicide. It's the same thing. We insert here and we choose a scatter plot. Again, this is the relationship between population and we have here these two cases, Ceuta and Melilla, and these other two cases here that are Madrid and Barcelona. They are in the core group of provinces. So let's just remove this. Let's include the trend line to see what happens. Let's see trend line, linear, and to present the R square. So now we have it. So here, let's change it gives you a number in scientific notation, telling that there is no relationship between homicide rate and population. So let's take the let's take the stream cases out. Let's just delete this. Delete first Ceuta. Oops, what happened here? Oh, let's try to Ceuta y Melilla. Um, oops. Oh, how do I do this? Let me. The problem here is how to eliminate just these values without changing it all. Okay, here I have just eliminating Ceuta y Melilla. The number increased, but still is still low. And I try to now to take Madrid and Segovia, Madrid and Barcelona out. Let's try to just take out Madrid, and where is Barcelona? Barcelona is here. So if I take both Ceuta and Melilla that are stream cases, anomalies in terms of homicide rate, and I take out Barcelona and Madrid that are especially populous cities or provinces, I can see that there is a strong relationship, not so strong, but there is an important relationship between population and homicide rate. So places that are where there are more people living in, they tend to have higher homicide rates in Spain. So it's not unemployment the question. Population is also related to unemployment. This is let's make the graph for population and unemployment. Now that we have taken both Madrid and Barcelona out, let's aggregate another graph, and we see that population is driving both unemployment and homicide rate. Let's insert these two. And now we can see here unemployment. Let's take these ugly things out. And let's include the trend line. It's small, but it's positive. So for the most part, the higher the population, the higher the level of unemployment. And what about another relationship that we can establish is poorer places tend to present higher unemployment and be somewhat related to homicide. Let's try to do this. We see that a small influence on population on unemployment. This is there is a moderate relationship between or influence of population on homicide rate, and there is a moderate relationship between unemployment and homicide rate. Let's just see how it goes with the GDP. Let's just delete these ones, delete these graphs, and repeat the exercise, but now with the the GDP per capita. GDP and homicide first. So insert. And now we just need to take, oops, Ceuta and Melilla, there are it seems that there is no relationship here. We can add the trend line, but probably show us nothing, zero or something near zero. The little negative, but very small. So what we see here is that here. What we see here that this number is wrong because this trend line should be negative. We see a little, and this is steep. So I try again. Try to create this line because something is wrong here. It cannot be this trend line with these numbers. It's impossible. So let's try again to add some elements to the graphic. Okay, and well, options here, and try to present the R square. Well, I don't know what's happening here, but as you can see, the slope is going down and the number here is positive, and it should be negative. So something is really no, it's okay. It's the R square. I'm making a confusion here. The R, the correlation should be negative, but the R is very small. So if we change here, I just change here this number for the coefficient of correlation. Let me see if I can do this here. Not the R square, but no, it doesn't allow me to show the R, the correlation. But it's negative. I just need to multiply this um, 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 take the square root of this number and multiply this by -1, and I know what is the correlation, the association between homicide rates and GDP per capita. What I see is that it's negative, and it's small, but not null, not inexistent. There is a small relationship between the richer the province, the lower the homicide rate. So there is a small relationship between homicide rate and GDP per capita. Richer provinces tend to be less violent than those that are more violent. Let's go back and bring back Madrid and Barcelona. Let's put population. Oops, no, it's not this one. Oops, here to this graph and see how it affects the relationship. Here, Barcelona, oops, and Madrid. Oh, GDP per capita, okay. No, it doesn't affect because it's not population. So GDP per capita, as we can say, affects negatively the homicide rate. So until now, what we've learned? We've learned that first, population have a positive effect on homicide rate, and GDP per capita has um, negative effect. Unemployment also has a positive effect on homicide rate. So places where unemployment and population are higher tend to be or to present higher levels of homicide. And richer places tend to have lower levels of homicide than poorer places, although this relationship is not strong. So we can learn the idea of the exercises that we can learn by combining those things, by making association between these variables and making graphs about them, um, and try to learn these things combining this information. Here again, we have all this in Excel and we are copying and pasting things. But when you really do data analysis and you use a statistical package, things are quite easier to do. I'll give you an example how to do all these things I've done here using R. So let's go to R here. Here I have the the graph we just made for homicide rate. Okay, here I create a code. It took me 5 minutes to create it, um, of the homicide rate. As we can see, we have the same graph, but I could improve a lot in the visuals of the graph. I marked here by color Spain. I can see all the information, and I also create a function that I can adapt to other variables. So unemployment, I have the same information for unemployment. For example, here we have an average of 19.8% of unemployment in Spain. So all these provinces have lower unemployment or had lower unemployment in 2016 compared to the Spanish average, and these ones are those where the unemployment were higher. So you can see that Andalusia, Extremadura, Canarias were places where unemployment was really high, and Castilla y León, País Vasco, Rioja, etc., they had lower rates of unemployment, relatively lower rates of unemployment. The same for the percentage of vote in the PP, the theft rate. We can analyze all this data. Another way of doing this, as we saw it, is to compare the association between two variables. We did this using here a scatter plot. We use here this diagram. We can also compare all variables with all other variables. Here, what I'm doing here in this code is asking R, compute to me the association, the R, the correlation for all variables in the data set. So he creates me this matrix, like the PP with the vote in the PP, the percentage of vote in PP is equal to the percentage of the vote in the PP. The percentage of the vote in the PSOE, it's 0.2255 related to the PP. It's not strong, but it's positive. Where I have vote in the higher vote in the PSOE, I have a little bit also higher vote in the PP. But in Podemos, we see that where the vote in the PP is high, the vote in Podemos is low. So it's this way how we interpret correlations. So you should also Google how what is a correlation and how to interpret a correlation. This is important to understand these numbers and how to understand association between two variables, two magnitudes. For example, what's the relationship between um, population and homicide rate? So I have here population, and I can just look for homicide rate. It's difficult here, but we can see it. It's positive and 0.368. So it's not so strong, but it's positive. It's more, the population is more related with the divorce rate. Big cities tend to have more divorces than homicides. They are stronger related to to divorces than to homicides, but these both are positives. This is not good to see. This is very a lot of numbers, and it's really raw and difficult to interpret. But there are some graphics that we can do. For example, this is a correlation plot. If I run this, it creates me a graph that tells me the degree of association between these variables. For example, if the more red the color of the pie chart here, the stronger the association between these two. From 0 to 1, if you can recall, Podemos and PP, Podemos was minus 700, 0.768. So this is this number in negative. So this is also negative, and this is positive. The blue values are positive. So we can see that the PP do not works well with Podemos, with the vote of PP, the percentage of vote in larger provinces is smaller because it's a negative relationship with population, and it also has a negative population with relationship with theft rate, divorce rate, and these are important numbers. So what happens to PSOE is also negative with Podemos and negative with GDP per capita. These are telling us that places where PSOE has a higher percentage of votes, they have lower GDP per capita, they are poorer, they have higher unemployment. This is basically Extremadura, Castilla-La Mancha, Andalusia. They have lower rates of change in terms, or they reduced more thefts, and they have lower levels of theft than the other provinces. What happens with Podemos? Podemos have are concentrated. It's concentrated in big provinces with a lot of people: Barcelona, Madrid, Guipúzcoa. Rich provinces where the GDP per capita is high, where there is a higher levels of divorce because this is related to population, and also places where crime is higher, where theft in particular is higher. So this graph here helps us to contextualize and to understand how every variable in our small data set relates to all other variables. We can go on and make the same kinds of graphs we made before. Let's see, for example, how is the relationship between Podemos and unemployment. I'm just making here a graph. Oh, let me change some parameters. The margins. I want to this, and I'll just put some information. to identify the axis. So now we have this graph here that shows us the relationship between voting Podemos as a percentage of the valid votes and the unemployment rate. So we see that the higher the vote, the higher the vote in Podemos, the lower the unemployment rate. So these tools are called exploratory data analysis, and we can use them to find patterns, to understand relationship between variables, to explore data, and to give us summaries of the data, information that enables us to see patterns, to identify anomalies, as we saw in Ceuta y Melilla in terms of homicide. Ceuta y Melilla were anomalies because they were too far from the most of the other provinces. They have really huge homicide rates compared to the average in Spain. Um, so these tools helps us to understand data and to find patterns and find some hypotheses and learn more about such one phenomenon. We start asking about homicide rate and what were the factors that were associated with homicide rate. We can see that first of all, population is one important factor. Um, Population is really associated with unemployment, with homicide rate. GDP per capita is also associated with homicide rate. Unemployment also. So there are some elements like the level of income, the number of people living there, the number of people that are employed that are related to um, the homicide rate. This can lead to hypotheses and to us to look for more data in trying to establish a causal relationship. This is not causal. I cannot tell that population is causing homicide or the unemployment are causing homicide. But these are nice things to start a research or to raise new questions about how could the number of people living in a place be um, causing homicide, or what are the mechanisms that make people living in larger places, places where a lot of people live, kill more than in other places. Uh, these are the things that we need to learn to do, to associate, to visualize these patterns, these associations, and then try to formulate new questions and try to answer or establish the relationship, for example, between population and homicide. Okay, this is all for now, and I hope you enjoyed it. And any doubts, just write me. Okay, bye.